ቤተክርስቲያን ሓሊፍና ክንፍትሾ እዛ መጽሓፍ ዓብ ተራ ዘለዋ መጽሓፍ እያ መምህርና ፕሮፌሰር ፎልከር ጽቡቕ ጌርኩም ክትቅበልዎም بتحسنا حتى بروح مشات أغني لك أنا ويحلكم قريتها.
Okay. Thank you very much. And let me. Sorry, I have a PowerPoint. I think I can share this, right?
Yes, you can do share. Yeah, like it should be next to the mic and to the camera. If you press share, it's going to give you the options. Either if you have any screen open, it's going to show you that, or like press the window part.
Maybe I make screen. So okay. Now you can see my screen, I think.
Yes, that's good now. That's good.
Just a second.
But I can't put all of them.
I think it's working now.
Okay.
Can you see it or not?
Can you see the PowerPoint?
I can see. It's good on my end.
Okay, and you can hear me?
It's great. Yeah. So okay. Thank you. Just to brief explain what he was saying. I know like it's important for you also to hear what he was sharing. He was mentioning like that your school and like your academic work, especially your project on the Justinian and the making of the Syrian Orthodox Church, quite a very interesting book. And we are very grateful for your time, for your availability, and we would. Yeah, we are very, very grateful. This topic is very interesting for us because Saint Dioscorus is a canonical saint in our church. We are in communion. We also have a liturgical text that is attributed to him, even though I think scholars today agree that he never composed that text himself. It's one of our liturgical, or one of our anaphoras. Are attributed to him, or yes, like are named after him. So we're very grateful. Thank you, Professor. And you have the platform 45 to 1 hour. We can take longer than that if needed. So thank you again.
Thank you for inviting me. And let me start very frank. I would be happy if you have questions or so. Ask them maybe in between. If I mean, there are certain questions it doesn't really make sense to have them just at the end. So if there are problems, you don't understand something or so, then ask me. At the moment, I have to say I usually work more with Zoom. I don't really see anyone. I just speaking here against my PowerPoint presentation. So just stop me if you want to say something or ask something. I'm sure we can also talk afterwards. But if you miss something or there are problems in understanding, I think it makes more sense if you say it directly than just wait for 45 minutes or an hour. So ask us. I don't mind. Introductory notes I have here very clearly. I speak here as a historian, not a theologian. You will see this throughout that I'm trained as a historian. I'm not trained as a theologian. Obviously, working on late antique ecclesiastical history, I need to learn a little bit also about theology. Sorry, there's an echo. I don't know if someone has still the.
Let me see if I can.
ምናልባት እሶም ከይኮኑ ክሳይ ብክልተኣትዮም
Okay. Can you? Okay. Yeah. Shall I try? No, that sounds better. I think it's good. Okay. You will see this throughout probably that I'm a historian, not a theologian. And sometimes I have discussions also with theologians. If we speak about councils, the so-called ecumenical councils, theologians try to tell me, this is about theology. And as a historian, I would always say it's about politics. If the president of a country invites you for a meeting, maybe today it would rather be about education or so, usually not about ecclesiastical matters, depending on the country. Of course, you will talk about education, but it is in the end very political because it's the president of a country who invites you. And here we speak about the later Roman Empire. We talk about a state, and the Roman emperor is the one who invites you. So this is political by default, despite the fact that you are debating theology, that you are debating doctrine. So my outline, I approach this from different ends. So as I said, interrupt me. I have to say, I wasn't entirely sure, how much you know about late antique history, about late antique ecumenical councils, about some of the church fathers that we'll talk about. And so I tried to approach it from different angles, very shortly about Christianity in Roman Egypt, because I have a few nice pictures also there that I would like to introduce and, show, we just talked about, right, earlier, that the Eritrean church is now autocephalous, but I mean, has been connected and still has connections to the Coptic church. So we are speaking here about Coptic Christianity and about the early centuries, how this came about. Just a few slides. Then my theological part will be, of course, to talk about the Virgin Mary, the Mother of God, and the Theotokos, this is the Greek term, the birth giver of God. This is what usually is translated as Mother of God, and which leads to the 5th century Christological controversy with Cyril of Alexandria on the one side, and Nestorius actually only for a short moment on the other side. It's then Theodoret of Kyros and some others will be also play a role there, at least for the theology, Theodore of Mopspestia. How to govern the church? This is partially, of course, political, but, it's also, we have the questions in the early centuries. What is the church, right? Again, coming back to the Eritrean church, it's now an independent church. So it has its own institution, it has its own hierarchy, it, has its own government. It is ruled by bishops. But, how does this develop, particularly in the early centuries? It takes time to figure that out. We actually get the hierarchy. We have deacons, priests, bishops. That's a development for something like 3 centuries until we get this. And, councils is then also something which Christians and, the priests also needed to learn how to do this, as well as, then if we're more getting really into the Roman Empire, I will speak shortly about Theodosius II and religious politics, because he is the emperor in the time of Cyril as well as of Dioscorus. And, he is summoning the councils of Ephesus in 431. There's a second council of Ephesus in 449, and he dies then actually in 450. But emperors also needed to learn how to deal with Christianity and with the Christian church, which was also something they were not accustomed to. Of course, you have emperors, as the head of the state, there were also the head priests in the state, and they didn't really understand that, in the Christian church, you would have then specialized, priests, bishops, and, they would not themselves be ordained priests here. And last but not least, of course, I come to Dioscorus and his contribution, which, is my book is basically about, 431 from the Council of Ephesus until Chalcedon in 451. This is, it's a book on largely 20 years, or even, the first chapter is actually on Cyril, but the later chapters are about then Dioscorus. So 442 to 451, or he died actually in 454, 3 years after the Council of Chalcedon. He dies in exile, and so this is a little bit what I work about, or have worked about. Now, if we speak about Egyptian Christianity, we of course speak about the Apostle Mark. You see him here very much to the right side. This is an Ethiopian, the Garima Gospels, one of these two beautiful gospel books from, I think this is the earlier one, probably around 5th century, on the throne of St. Mark. Athanasius, of course, you see here the second from the left, important church fathers. The today Coptic Patriarch Tawadros II, and on the left side, this is a late antique Alexandrian chronicle. And you see on the left, the bar-headed man, this is Theophilus. This is the uncle and the predecessor of Cyril of Alexandria. He is also Bishop of Alexandria, and he is the one in which tenure the Serapeum, the famous temple of the god Serapion, is being destroyed. And you can see this here in this very manuscript, or in these fragments. You see he is standing on the temple, and this dark colored person there, that's the god Serapion, actually, that, you know, he is triumphing over the god Serapion. We can't say much about the Apostle Mark. It's similar to Rome and Peter. There have been in recent years actually a big controversy. Has Peter ever been to Rome? Because you can't prove it. We have a Peter tradition, of course, but this starts in the 2nd century. That means literally generations after Peter must have died in Rome. And, you know, we have then the veneration of the grave also there. So, I mean, there is a Peter tradition, but you can't prove that he was there in the 1st century. Similar with Mark in Alexandria. We know, of course, we have the Gospel of Mark. Someone like Mark must have existed, but inasmuch he was responsible for founding the See of Mark in Alexandria, we only have the earliest witness that we really have is Eusebius at the beginning of the 4th century, the famous church historian Eusebius of Caesarea, but nothing really earlier. Clement of Alexandria, I just mentioned him because he's one of the early Christian fathers from Alexandria, and of course Origen. I don't know if any one of you has worked on Origen. He's a genius. Of course, always, you know, questioned because some of his work is very speculative, but always has drawn throughout history people who like to read him, work on him. Really a genius, making commentaries on biblical books, making also translations, and always being on the verge of being condemned by the mainstream church. A very different Athanasius of Alexandria, one of the very important bishops of Alexandria, as a young deacon, being at the First Ecumenical Council in Nicaea in 325. The bishop at this time is Alexander. He's the successor a few years later, being in exile several times. You can see he you know, he lived a good life. I mean, he was, you know, had a very long tenure. 45 years, I think exiled 3 times, so he was not that often actually in Alexandria. Known as being a church father, known for his theology, but also known as defending Nicene Christianity against the Arian controversy. I come back to this. Cyril of Alexandria, also one of the saints, and this is not just in the Eritrean church or Ethiopian church, Coptic, but also the Western tradition also sees, as well as Athanasius also, I mean, sees Cyril as one of the great saints. A politician, I would say, a very good politician like Athanasius as well. I come back to this. Very successful, not only a theologian, but also as a bishop, very successful. Here I have a few more pictures, and I think I've done one more slide. So because I can't go too general about Christianity in Egypt, I just wanted to bring this in because some of the repercussions, of course, are not only by the historical figures, but if you look, the first one I mentioned here, Catherine of Alexandria, and you see on the left the icon of her with the wheel. This is, you know, how she was martyred. That's a completely legendary story. There's nothing historical about her, but she's one of the most important saints in the Western Middle Ages, in Western Christianity in Europe. And the same is true with the so-called Theban Legion, completely legendary. legion is the Roman unit for 5,000 to 5,500 soldiers, and supposedly was a completely Christian legion, with, you know, one of the major officer was Morris, and you see him, the black person here on the left. This is from a medieval cathedral in Magdeburg in Eastern Germany, and on the top, the church you see there, this is actually my hometown from Bonn. It's dedicated to Cassius and Florentius, supposedly also two martyrs from this Theban legion, Theban in the south of Egypt. Again, as I said, completely legendary, but you know, you have many churches, particularly in the Rhineland in west of Germany, but also in some Belgium and France, dedicated to some of these saints from the Theban legion, playing a great role. And as I said, Catherine of Alexandria is one of the major saints in Western. So, but this is not historical, this is fictional. What's historical is, you know, the others I bring in here having, you know, a great impact and starting a tradition on asceticism with Antony the Great, but also then with Pachomius and Canute of Artripe, with, you know, founding monasteries in Egypt. And I mean, the tradition is still alive in Egypt, but of course also then in many other countries. Different. The monasteries and the traditions are different for Egypt. It's then Pachomius also wrote rules which are still in place in Coptic Christianity. My last slides before I come to the Virgin Mary, the Theotokos, and starting with this and also the controversy that leads to the split here. Just give you a short overview. How Coptic Christianity then split, and with Coptic Christianity then also, you know, your tradition, Ethiopian and Eritrean churches. It's the Council of Chalcedon, which was very divisive between, yeah, you know, the European usually speak about, you know, West, they mean Latin, and, you know, East, the Orthodox tradition, Greek. Of course, if you work then on the so-called Oriental Orthodox traditions, you realize that East and West are always relative terms. So, but this is a great split between maybe, you know, what's later than European Christianity and all Near Eastern Christianities, Armenian, Syrian, Orthodox, Coptic, Ethiopian, Eritrean churches, and of course all the Indians also, you know, the Syrians have also in India churches. The accusation is always monophysitism, you know, one nature in Christ, meaning that, you know, you just see, and this is usually then the divine nature in Christ, but I come back to this, and not really seeing the humanity, the incarnation of Christ, that he came down to earth and, you know, died then on the cross. And of course, from the other sides, the Miaphosites, the non-Chalcedonians accuse those who support the Council of Chalcedon as Nestorians. I come back to this. This has changed a little bit in the 20th century. Actually, here in Vienna, I had now learned, I met the general secretary here of Pro Oriente also. This is the dialogue between the Roman Catholic Church. They support this financially also. The dialogue with the Oriental Orthodox, but also the Greek Orthodox, or the Orthodox tradition, I mean, the Orthodox tradition of Constantinople. And realizing, you know, that some of these splits that happened with Chalcedon are not because, you know, one side is really different in terms of, you know, one side is heretical, has a different doctrinal understanding, but, you know, it's about terminology. And of course, then throughout the centuries, it's of course then also about human tragedies, I mean, persecutions on one side or the other. But I come back to this in a second. So that would be just my very short introduction on, you know, Coptic or Christianity in Roman Egypt. Now, if we come to what, you know, caused the Christological controversy in the 5th century, and which leads to the Council of Chalcedon, it's actually not that, you know, people immediately clashed over the natures, you know, the human nature and the divine nature. It was rather something also in terms of veneration, discussing the Virgin Mary. And if you know, look at the Virgin Mary throughout centuries, I mean, particularly if you, for my I'm as a Roman Catholic background, Mary has always played a very strong role. I show you here the pictures on the left side. What you see here is from Mexico, Guadalupe, the Virgin of Guadalupe. The young boy carrying her, or the gentleman with the tattoo on the back. But of course, also again in medieval art, or the right top is actually one of my ancestors was an artist in the 19th century, and there's a Pietà in a church in Germany. The Mater Dolorosa, the mother of Christ, being sorry about the death so a very famous, they're so-called Pietà, usually this kind of depictions of Christ, and you find them everywhere in European churches. But the question, of course, starts with earlier. If we look at the New Testament, what is said about Christ, it is no problem that Christians call themselves as followers of Christ, but how to understand Christ is a development. Word became flesh. This is very important. You can also later see this in Cyril of Alexandria. He claims also, he's the Messiah. He's not just a historical Jesus, but in Christian tradition, of course, he's the Christ, the anointed, the one for which the Jews have waited that they would come back on earth. And we can see in one of St. Paul's letters in the Corinthian, about the resurrection, which has been witnessed by Peter, by many people. So in that sense, there is God Father, and there is God Logos, being the incarnated, Son of God, becomes a man. And this, of course, develops, and questions also develop. And this is the depiction here, by the way, in the left side of Arius, and I think this is Nicolaus. This is also legendary that he slept Arius at the Council of Nicaea, and the death of Arius. We have actually a story about this, that it was on a public toilet in Constantinople. This is, of course, if you're a heretic, you need to die a terrible death. So this is what you can read in, I think it's Socrates, the church historian, in which you can find this. So, but this is then you get into a controversy to understand Christ. And the question that has been asked by Arius, and which is the controversy then with Athanasius, is he fully God? Is he created? He's begotten. He's not created, right? So he's not in time being created by God. Arius, of course, claims it's only the Father who is eternal, without beginning, and the Son was created. A very common claim was the so-called homoions, that comes from homoios being similar, that the Father is similar. The Son, sorry, is similar to the Father, but not exactly the same. That was very common, actually. We find many in the 4th century who would actually go for this. We have councils that actually in 359, 360, that actually proclaim this. As I said, Athanasius is against this. He is one who goes for homoousios, which is then what all the Christian traditions then later agreed upon, but not in the 4th century. That he is of the same essence, or as you probably also in one different languages would call it differently, but consubstantial. That he's consubstantial with the Father. He's of the same ousia, the Greek term for essence. That would be. I'm not going into this about the distinctions between ousia and hypostasis. That there has been many discussions about this. Therefore it's called the Trinitarian controversy, because it's how about to understand the Father and the Son? These are the three hypostases: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. This is before we come to the Christological controversy, which is then focusing on the second person of God, which is, on the Son. Is he, how to understand human and divine nature within Christ? How fully human is he? How divine is he? And how do you fit them together in one person? And this actually came up, as I said. It didn't come up first in, we have in the 4th century, we have a little bit, we can see this, that there has been discussions, but that this becomes public, it becomes more a question of piety than, a philosophical discourse. Because there is discussions. Nestorius is the new patriarch of Constantinople, and he says, let's speak about Christological. It's the birth giver of Christ. You can't be wrong with this. Mary is the birth giver of Christ, and this is, the discussion was between anthropotokos, is she the birth giver of a human, or Theotokos, the birth giver of a god. And so, but this is then, you already get Mary devotion at this time. And then, many people say like, no, they really would like to worship Mary as the mother of God, not Christological. So this becomes really a public issue. And Cyril of Alexandria actually joins in there, is very much opposed to Nestorius. We have several letters by Cyril of Alexandria to Nestorius, in which he rebukes Nestorius and his understanding. We call it usually the logos sarx, the flesh. Logos is the word, sarx is the flesh model, the word incarnated. This is what, going back to the Gospel of John, as you saw before. I had the quote, and he's very famous. One of his sentences he sent in also to Nestorius is, whosoever shall not recognize that the word of God suffered in the flesh, that he was crucified in the flesh, and that likewise in that same flesh he tasted death, and that he is become the first begotten of the dead, for as he is God, he is the life, and that it is he that gives life. Let him be anathema, let him be condemned. And, insisting that this is a Theotokos, usually being translated since then also the mother of God. Many people, also Eastern bishops, where we see the controversy. There are many bishops that later go then in exile after the Council of Ephesus in 431. Actually, it would not have been, a problem for them to speak about the birth giver, about Theotokos. They would have been fine. But the question is nevertheless, Christology, why do we have this kind of heavy controversy on this? Why are people actually, so to speak, get worked up about this? How can you get, the piety is one issue, but we have also, if we speak about the natures of Christ, an issue behind it, because it is basically a matter of salvation. How to understand, what the Father and the Son are, and it is God the Son become human. And this is then also where we have the later change, right? Who was crucified for us, have mercy on us. This is then also an understanding, of course, I would see this, as a causal, and, someone who has become human, who therefore understands human better than, a God really far away, this is also a possibility, right? God is far away and, he doesn't really understand humans and doesn't care for him. No, this is the Son of God who becomes human himself, suffers like a human, knows how humans feel, and he dies for them so that they can actually also receive salvation, that they can, receive eternal life. In that sense, it really matters. And this is how to understand the 5th and 6th century, that actually so many people got involved in this. And, that we even have, some uproars in Constantinople. We can see this, what I just quoted, who was crucified for the Holy One. This is, their chants, and if you understand this Trinitarian, is it, to the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, or is it just to the second person? And, the second person of God is Christ, and he's crucified for us. So if you only have it to the second, you can add this, who is crucified for us, have mercy to us. If this should be in the liturgy or not, this is, the so-called Trisagion controversy in 512. There were people killed in the streets about it. So there were people who really, for them, it mattered, because, it mattered for their salvation. I'm not going to speak about, this is then where we come to the debate also. Today, you will read about this also if we speak about Cyril of Alexandria. Usually we call him a Miaphysite. You would also probably say you're from a Miaphysite tradition, as the Eritrean Orthodox Church, like the Ethiopian, like the Coptic. There have been scholars now, a Dutch scholar arguing that, Cyril is a Diophysite, because, in some sense, he speaks about, you can argue he speaks about two natures, because it is the terminology, which is also problematic and has been different uses by different theologians. And this is something, which scholarship is also at the moment debating about. I'm not going into this. This is a very theological discussion, and I would not be the best person to talk with you about this. I rather would like to talk with you now about, how to discuss this, because as, just saw, there are many things here that disputed, how to settle a dispute. And this is where we talk then about church councils. I have to say, I like this left picture with, all these fathers sitting there, with all the bishops sitting there. I counted. There are really 318. So that is the Council of Nicaea. I have no idea where the picture comes from. I found this in the internet, and I really like it because it really, it really makes it the Council of the 318 Fathers. So the question is how to, govern a church, how to rule a church, and of course there's also a development since the 1st century, and of course it is also, there is an ideological part, there is a spiritual part, and here we are concerned with the institutional. And there is, if we speak about the church as an institution, ideological, if you look at the New Testament, if 3 are convened in my name, I'm among them, right? This is, but this church as an institution, what makes a church a church? Or the church in a more universal sense. And there is always, you have very clear, and this is also where, the different churches, the Eritrean church, or they can claim, we have certain rituals, we have a liturgy, you have doctrines, you have laws, how to rule the church. There's also actually here also, I would say, a Roman background, because the early church grew within the Roman Empire, and in Rome you have many laws have been developed, and the church actually from early onwards also takes this, or we speak there about canons, or later about canon law. There is also, of course, something which defines a church, which is about their art they're using, the buildings they're making, and of course at some point, and this is if you are members of the Eritrean church, you know this. It's a traditional church, right? It builds on the history. It's not just, it's different than Protestants or evangelicals, for example, where the sola scriptura. It's only about the scripture, only about Bible. No, the history, the church fathers do matters, the councils do matter, and of course, very important are here the hierarchy, the clerics, the bishops, and yes, they in the end they would be the ones who come together and meet at councils. But as I said before, the so-called ecumenical councils are always councils who have been convened by emperors. I bring here just the early ones and put just in here what they actually ruled, what they actually discussed. I'm not going into this. I think that would go too far. But it is about, defining orthodoxy, defining a doctrine would be done at ecumenical councils. And the question would, of course, be, as I said before, this is also highly political. What would be the role of the emperors? Because they would convene the councils. They would also, we can see this, have an influence. We know this at Chalcedon, for example. There's clear pressure by Emperor Marcion to get a new formula of faith. Bishops are very reluctant. They don't really want to do this. And of course, if you have, after the council, if the bishops come up with certain decisions, it is expected that what the bishops have decided will be translated into law. In other words, the emperors would issue laws afterwards. If we look at this time, 4th century, what the Roman Empire looks like, it's huge. And I mean, since 395, we have a divided empire. You see here through the Mediterranean, the red light, that's kind of line. This is where East and West are being divided. So, what during throughout Libya in the south, you can see this, and the Balkans in the north. This is also the language divide. This is basically, you have a Greek-speaking Eastern Roman Empire and the Latin-speaking Western Roman Empire, and you have emperors in Constantinople, and you have emperors either in Rome, but less so, and then Ravenna at the Adriatic Sea, where the Western Roman Emperor has basically the capital, and the Western Roman Empire is crumbling, right? I mean, it ends in 476, and already earlier, around 400, Britannia, or 410, Britannia is left without soldiers, and it basically gets lost. I'm not getting into this, but just to give you an idea, Roman emperors, they have a vast country to rule. And if we talk about this, I already said, who convenes a council, it's the emperor. Location, if we look at where it has been convened, it's always the East. The bishops of Rome also usually send delegates. They don't come themselves. It's often very strictly organized by the emperor, by delegates of the emperor, who convenes this at least, even if these organizers don't have a vote like the bishops. Numbers are very different. 318 fathers. This is the traditional number. We have no idea how many bishops were at Nicaea. Probably in Constantinople around 150, Ephesus in 431 also 150, at Ephesus 2 a little less, around 130, and then Chalcedon supposedly 630, I believe, but at least more than 500. Chalcedon was a big council. Marcion really wanted many people to come there, and yeah, I said already things about this. The important things I would like to discuss here is the emperor calls for the council. If we speak about ecumenical, which means something, it would be the same like universal. What makes a council universal? It is interesting, Council of Nicaea, as I mentioned before, has been debated in the 4th century. Because the Council of Nicaea voted for homoousios, the same essence, which the majority of bishops were not fine with for a good part of the 4th century. Athanasius was for a good part, as I said, in exile and a minority party. But later, looking backwards, this is of course always the perspective we should have. Looking backwards, it became the council, the Holy Council. I have this here, sorry, in quotation marks. I mean, I probably should have it in italics. The Holy Council. This is what the sources call it. And, later we speak about, a list of ecumenical councils, but this is a later development. Kind of the second ecumenical council that was there was the Council of Ephesus in 431. Today, of course, we would call it the third ecumenical councils, but there was no second at this time. In 431, we can see it in the sources. It's Nicaea and Ephesus. And Ephesus was immediately debated. And I come to this in a second when I speak about Cyril, why this was debated, because many bishops refused to accept this on the same level as Nicaea. Then you get the second council in Ephesus in 449. And we see the official declarations by the emperor is, if you're a good Christian, you need to follow these councils, Nicaea, Ephesus 1 and Ephesus 2. So, and then what we have today, this ecumenical councils, we only find after Chalcedon. Chalcedon annuls the second council of Ephesus and bring in Constantinople. I mean, the council happened in 381, but it was not really regarded as an ecumenical council. So only after 451 we actually see this traditional councils that we still have today, and all traditions actually accept. I mean, they accept Nicaea, Constantinople, and Ephesus. Chalcedon, then the Western tradition also accepts, but even the Miaphysite, the non-Chalcedonian tradition, they are not saying like, oh, it's Nicaea, Ephesus 1 and Ephesus 2. No, they also say Nicaea, Constantinople, Ephesus 1. And with this, I come now to Cyril, and I will make it short. I was very much interested in this, and I also wrote an article on this, because Cyril paid the largest bribe we know of in antiquity. After the Council of Ephesus, the Council of Ephesus was a disaster. As I said, today we call it the Third Ecumenical Council, but I mean at the time it was a disaster for Theodosius because he called for an ecumenical council. What happens? Cyril comes and other bishops come. He convenes the council. He condemns his opponent Nestorius and says, fine, this is how things work. And then the supporters from the east, John of Antioch and others come. They say, why didn't you wait for us? Why did you already, condemn Nestorius without asking us? They convene their own council. They condemn Cyril. And then both bishops send delegations to the emperor and say, like, we are the right council. We are orthodox, and you should ratify what we did. And the emperor, a young man at this point, was then in a situation that he didn't really know what to do. So for him, this was quite a disaster. But what I talk about here is the aftermath of the council, and this is basically about the 12 chapters. I mentioned before the 12 chapters, and the last one, it's about whoever shall not recognize that the word of God suffered in the flesh, that he was crucified in the flesh, let him be anathema, let him be condemned. And the Eastern bishops, this is the tradition of Theodore of Mopsuestia. This is the tradition of Diodor of Tarsus. This is Theodoret, at this time still alive, a great opponent of Cyril. They thought this is unacceptable. This is heresy. This is pure heresy. I mean, how can God suffer? And they were very much opposed to this. So this is where, this was not just about politics. This was really where, there was a clash of theological traditions also here. We find then very interestingly, these letters have survived. Someone must have published them. It's a Latin translation from the 6th century. It's not the original Greek. A letter with, a list of what Cyril and his archdeacon sent to Constantinople. And, I mean, we are speaking about pre-modern empire, so there have always been some kind of grease payments to state officials. That's not really, a big bribe. This is, how administration was, and bureaucracy was probably running. But then there was also a lot of gold sent with them, and we have letters, and in order that he would help us in the cause about those matters which were written to him, 50 pounds of gold, if he shall have acted in accordance with what was written to him by the most magnificent Aristotle, and 200 pounds of gold. The list of gifts, it's very interesting if you go through this. I have done this. I can't do this now in detail, but apparently ivory chairs, right? I mean, ivory was luxury. Well, I guess today it's also luxury. But also in antiquity, we have here the chair on the right is from the 6th century. From Ravenna, from the Bishop of Ravenna, but maybe produced in Egypt, probably in Constantinople, coming from the east. And also what we find there are strutiones, ostrich eggs. And there is a very interesting story in a medieval Arabic text about, how ostrich eggs should be important. They should exhort Christians not to distract their spirit from prayer by hanging from ceilings. And this is actually an Egyptian monastery where you have ostrich eggs. So these are, gifts sent to courtiers in Constantinople. They can, of course, you can use them at home, but of course you could also give them, for example, to a church. I would say then dual use. You can, of course, be, kind of have this as gifts for yourself, but you can also make this as a donation to a monastery or a church. But the other is gold being sent. And we are speaking here about 2,580 Roman pounds of gold. This is 838.5 kilograms of gold. I just checked the gold course today. So we are speaking about a little bit more than $50 million. And this was only part of it. If you read the letters, then also the Bishop of Constantinople should chip in probably with more gold. This is a huge amount of money by any standard. This was shipped to Constantinople and people got this. I have here the list. If you look at this, who got what. And it's very interesting also, particularly not people who have, official offices are getting bribed, but cubicularii, chamberlains, people who are close to the emperor and to the empress get, all this kind of money, 50 pounds of gold and 52 pieces of, what I showed you, clothes, furniture, etc. I don't say this, I know Cyril is a saint in all Christian traditions, and theologians sometimes, they have been, when they have explained this, they always try to, he did it for the good of the, the church. I think, this is, ecclesiastical politics at this time is domestic politics. Think about hotly debated issue. I don't know from what country you're now joining today. Some Western countries would be about social politics or migration politics. Probably in many countries would be very hot issues. Imagine ecclesiastical politics would be migration politics. So it's a very hot topic. And so as a bishop, you are not a late antique bishop not only needs to be a theologian, but you need to be a politician. So in that sense, I'm not blaming by showing you this about Cyril. I think he was a very good politician in order to, also get his beliefs, which he had, his doctrine through, get it approved by the court. And I mean, this is what in the end happens. It's about the 12 chapters. It's really saving this. Again, I should not talk about this any longer. I already take too much time. It's about the 12 chapters he wanted to get through, and he was in the end successful. I just show you here, this is the ivory throne, and there are ivory tablets have later been also used on this ambo in Aachen, that is. Yeah, I don't need to go about this, but in the end, he is successful with this. It is John of Antioch, that's the opponent, right? The one who supported Nestorius, who is regarded as, coming back to the church, accepting what Cyril is dictating to him. So in this sense, Cyril's gift proved to be a very good investment. I don't want to sound like a businessman here, but is an investment because, I mean, he really plundered the church. If I can just go back for a second here about the money. 2,580 Roman pounds of gold. At this time, probably the income of Alexandria in terms of gold per year was, if we look at the legislative text, it says 100 pounds of gold. Now, it's not sure if we can trust this, but even make it 200 pounds of gold a year or 300 pounds. We are still talking about years of, and without thinking about, what the Church of Alexandria also probably need to spend on issues, also on widows, on the poor, etc. Just, the income. How many years do you need to save to get 2,580 pounds of gold? It's really, Cyril plundered the treasury of the Church of Alexandria. But, in the end, he has never been questioned in his orthodoxy. He is regarded an author, a saint, and the 12 chapters also become the cornerstone of orthodoxy. So in that sense, he did what he needed to do. But I'm not sure he was completely popular. There's one of the things I argue in my book, that we do have a dynasty. He was already the nephew of Theophilus, as I mentioned before. He was his maternal uncle. He ruled Alexandria, and with rule, you can really think about that the Patriarch of Alexandria is the most powerful person in Alexandria and in Egypt, more than the Roman governors, from what we see. So this is almost 60 years of this family rule in Alexandria. And from what we see then in the sources, they may have plundered also the church, meaning, there was nepotism involved, that certain family members and also the minions of this family clan misappropriated church goods. And so I argue in my book that Dioscorus was most likely the head of the anti-Cyrillian faction in Alexandria. He was theologically very much a Cyrillian in the sense of that he, continued the politics of his predecessor, but in political terms, he was probably the opponent. Before I come into this, just a word also on Theodosius, but we're getting maybe short in time. Maybe I leave out Theodosius and come to Dioscorus. And if you have questions, I come back to Theodosius, and I had also a word here on Theodoret, the opponent, both of Cyril as well as of Dioscorus. But let me maybe come to Dioscorus. In Western scholarship, he's usually regarded very negatively. The Attila, the famous slayer of the Roman emperor in the 5th century, and even Norman Baines, a very famous British Byzantinist, said Dioscorus, the Attila of the Eastern Church, as Amelli has styled him, though this is surely an insult to Attila. So how bad he was. Tyrant bishop, violent, rapacious, unscrupulous, scandalously immoral. And I bring here also Jenkins. He has written many books, calls him, like a good machine politician. Dioscorus wanted to help his friends and harm his enemies, but such politicians usually have a sense of limits of what they can reasonably get away with. They also know that it rarely pays them to unleash total war against all enemies at once, which is roughly what Dioscorus did at Second Ephesus. It almost seems as if he deliberately went out of his way to infuriate or alienate virtually every church leader, who was then forced either to accept defeat at his hands or fall into some subordinate position. Why did he act like this? Almost certainly he was misled by the absolute power he seemed to be getting from the emperor, who was in a position to overawe any opposition. Or perhaps he was just Alexandrian in that he came from a church that had over a century's history of trampling all opposition, using a mixture of intimidation, manipulated piety, and invocation of martyrdom. And this continues. But one final possibility, not to be dismissed, is that he really was suffering from some kind of personality disorder, which drove him to extremes of paranoia and uncontrollable rage. Historians are justifiably shy about undertaking psychiatric diagnosis on the long dead, if only because the track record of such post-mortem analysis is so dismal. But we should at least consider the possibility. There is such a thing as bullying, and then there is what Dioscorus did on a regular basis. Now, I don't believe any of this. and this is also what I argue in my book. I think all these Western depictions of Dioscorus have been wrong. He wasn't any of this. He was, as I said, first of all, an opponent of the Cyrillian party. He struggled to come to power against Cyrillians. He expelled the Cyrillians from Alexandria. We know this. This is in the sources. And afterwards, he tried to bring order to the church. He was ordained and become a successor of Cyril to be a good administrator, and to help also that Church of Alexandria, which has been plundered by Cyril through the politics which he thought would be necessary, and he tried to organize it better. We can see the oikonomos, the steward of a church, is an important position in late antiquity. In Dioscorus, we at least know 3 by name, which it's not the case with Cyril. And in the later history of Alexandria, we see how the oikonomo, the stewards, these who look into the finances of the see, get more and more important, and several of them actually became then patriarchs. I argue in my book that this actually is due to Dioscorus looking into these day-to-day politics, how to govern actually an ecclesiastical see, that he does this. I'm not going into this. Yes, expelled Cyrillian family and retrieved funds that the church had lost through Cyril's nepotism. Improved governance of Alexandria, oikonomos, steward of the church, become more important. As I said, already under him we can see this, but then even after him, several oikonomos become patriarchs then of Alexandria. And in contrast to what scholars have said, he has not meddled with ecclesiastical politics until very late. He was forced into this, into these quarrels with Near Eastern bishops. This is mainly Theodoret, whom I skipped just the slide with him. He's one of the very important theologians at this time, the opponent of Cyril, very able one. We have a lot of his works. Theodosius was very distrustful of him and trusted Dioscorus, and trusted Dioscorus and also the Council of Ephesus, which I call it here Latrocinium. That's not my word. This is what Pope Leo called it, a robber council. So in that sense, it's not a proper council; it's more a robber council. This is, of course, also not correct. But if you look at this, this is, what actually later becomes out of Ephesus, because it is annulled by the Council of Chalcedon 2 years later. So the Council of Ephesus 2 in 449 is really the peak of Dioscorus' tenure as patriarch of Alexandria, and he deposes his opponents at the other sees, but this only lasts for 2 years. And I argue this is not due to him. This is not because he was violent at the so-called robber council. It was because of Theodosius, Emperor Theodosius, very tight ecclesiastical politics, and I also argue that it was Theodosius, the emperor, who also used the force at the council. The charge you can make to Dioscorus would be that he did not try to fend off the emperor stronger, and try to stop him. But the interests converge. He also wanted to condemn the opponents. Let me show you this. I skipped this. This is about episcopal turncoats. It's very interesting to go into this, but it's a side note. It's not really about Dioscorus. And at Ephesus, he deposed Theodoret. He deposed Domnus of Antioch, the bishop of Constantinople, and some other bishops in the east. And he appoints then allies in Constantinople as well as in Antioch. So that we actually have, you can call it probably Cyrillian bishops. I mean, all of them would not be Diophysite bishops at this time, but they actually don't ally then with Dioscorus 2 years later for political reasons. We can see this. And this is what, the Council of Chalcedon is then about. This is also very political in the sense of that the emperor who comes after Theodosius is a young man still when, he falls off the horse. And he became emperor in 408, but as a baby. So he ruled then for 42 years, but he was still in his 40s when he died. And Marcian is a soldier, the successor, and he's not accepted by the Western Roman Empire and emperor. I showed it to you, and so he needs Western support. And one of the ways to get Western support is, of course, via the Pope. Pope Leo, and we can clearly see that he favors Leo, who had called the Second Council of Ephesus a latrocinium, a robber council. So when Chalcedon is convened in 451, that this is the basis, and this tome means a letter basically, but we always call it a tome, a tomus. Because it's so famous. It's his famous letter. He wrote several letters and numbers, hundreds of letters, but this is so famous because this is where he, spells out his Diophysite, clearly Diophysite, to nature Christology, which in the East, most are Cyrillians. They're not very happy with this language also. By the way, there is a language divide also, right? I mean, Leo's delegates, most of them are Latin speaking. There's one who also knows Greek. And Leo is then, when the council is over, he says, tell me what happened. And the council is not being translated, and Leo doesn't know any Greek. And, the minutes are all in Greek. So he never actually read the council. The council get translated into Latin only 100 years later. This is basically when the first time. So at this point, Dioscorus is already called a heretic, although he has never been condemned by the council. So we see Dioscorus is in the minority. He thinks he has a good claim. He says, there was an ecumenical council. I've been made president by the emperor. It was accepted, and it's even in the legislation. What do you want? And we have the strange case of an ecumenical council, the Council of 449, being annulled by this council. And Dioscorus, he's not being condemned as a heretic. He's then deposed. And the reasons they use is that he didn't show up for his trial. So, he has been called 3 times and he doesn't show up. We have the minutes where he says, he's not coming. He wants to see the emperor. And of course, we also need to have in mind here that more than 100 bishops who were now sitting in trial over him had also supported him 2 years earlier. This is where I said, the turncoats, the bishops who basically, said one thing in this council and a different thing in the next council. Dioscorus is not like this. He's very straightforward. He said, this is what I believe. And, this is then, if you want to condemn me, condemn me. As I said, in the end, he is deposed, but in Western tradition, he immediately becomes a heretic. This is very clear. Here, yes. Pope Leo Emena called him a defender of deceit and a second pharaoh. This is where my title comes from also. He has not been the first who calls the Bishop of Alexandria pharaohs because they are so powerful. More than just ecclesiastical leaders, they are so powerful. And in the Oriental tradition, of course, he becomes immediately with being sent to exile. He becomes a confessor, and then after his death, highly regarded in the Coptic tradition, but also in other traditions. He died, you see the map here, right? First, he was, if you look south of Constantinople, you'd say Kyzikos at the Marmara Sea. This is where he was first in exile. Then at the Black Sea, Heraclea. And then in Paphlagonia, in Gangra, this is where he actually died, a little south of Black Sea. You see Gangra in the theme of Paphlagonia. This is where he died in 454. And apparently 20 years later, he was brought to Alexandria by Timothy Aurelius in a ceremony honoring him as a confessor. And I very much like this Ethiopian text of Dioscorus, which you probably know. There's a whole tradition, of course, about this, that he resists Leo and also the Emperor Marcion. And the emperor and the empress were irritated at this, and the empress commanded them to smite St. Dioscorus on the mouth and to pluck out the hair of his beard, and they did so. Then he took the hair of his beard, which they had pulled out, and his teeth, which they had dropped out, and sent them to the city of Alexandria. And he said unto the people, behold, this is the fruit of the Orthodox faith. So I don't go further into the tradition, but we have, immediately a very divided tradition of Dioscorus in East and West, which has made it very interesting, but also very difficult to write a book on him because it is so divided. On the one hand, the villain, on the other hand, the saint, and nothing in the middle. There must have been a historical person behind him, and this is what I tried in my book to bring out. All right, thank you. That was. I went a little bit over time. I'm sorry.
Ooh, this is extremely exciting topic. By the way, if you don't have the book, this is the book. There was multiple times in the slide. Professor Menze, we are extremely grateful for the wonderful presentation. This is definitely like a needed text, like a needed historical book that we, as you said, we don't have anything in between. We don't have you have either condemning Dioscorus for everything, like every possible thing that you can think of, as heretic, as weak, uneducated. My first book that I read in this topic from non-Oriental Orthodox tradition was the book called the Defense of Chalcedon in the East by I believe the author is Patrick. I don't
remember, Patrick Gray.
Yeah. And you have a depiction of Dioscorus as who is less skilled, who's not a politician, who is not also have this general assumption that he was less educated compared to Cicero of Alexandria and everything. And then there was no proof of any of the claims. There was literally no supporting evidence. And so I was super mad. And then I had to where is this all this evidence is we can't make a judgment because we don't have anything that's of him, no writing, no one who commentary or anything, and it's very limited time. He's not a similar as Cicero, who had rule or governed the church more than Cicero, probably more than 40 years. And Dioscorus is very it was just brief. So I was super mad, and then I found your book. I actually sent it to my professor. I stood because he's trying to write a book about the theological parts of the Chalcedonian and Chalcedonian. Professor Peter Butenev from St. Vladimir. So as soon as you release the book, as you need to include this, and he was super excited. So we are truly grateful. It's just wonderful presentation. We are gonna go from just accepting questions from the audience. I am gonna have a few questions as well. So let's go. Any questions? You can unmute yourself and then yeah. Okay. If you have any questions, please unmute yourself. Until anyone brings their questions, I was surprised about your historical presentation of the bribes and censorial of Alexandria, and that I'm aware of that controversial moment, but like a history, but I wasn't sure the political. I know he was a politician, but I wasn't sure, like there was some bribes and exchanges of goods between censorial and like the opponents, like in Constantinople. Did this start after the controversy, or because that's like something that I was trying to like, so censorial came to this kind of method after the Nestorian controversy, or this was also something that was happening even before? And do you see, this is like maybe like another question. We know Censorial of Alexandria had involved in the deposition of St. John Chrysostom, because as a deacon he had participated in the I think in one or the two meetings where Theophilus of Alexandria was presiding, and then like John Chrysostom was deposed. And then you have Censorial himself later accepting John Chrysostom and like including him into the diptychs and in the church. So was that also part of the political approach, or like was that a kind of, because like John Chrysostom had, by the time of Censorial, became very famous in the city, like people and everything. So could we include that also as one of his strategies?
Sorry, whose strategy? Who is strategy?
Like Censorial. Cyril of Alexandria had accepted John Chrysostom, even though during his time he had involved like in his deposition, removal from office.
I don't know in as much Cyril was really thinking about John Chrysostom. I mean, you're right about, John Chrysostom also, I mean, hasn't been recalled also, by popular demands to Constantinople. And, we have interest. It's actually a very interesting case also, because I mean, Alexandria has meddled with Constantinople several times. I mean, this is, I mean, you really have a history there of meddling by Alexandrians who have been more powerful. This is, this is a long development. If you look at the 4th century and you think about Athanasius already, a very strong patriarch, and very also doing things. And then you have Theophilus, and then you have Cyril, and you get Dioscorus. And only after Chalcedon, you see that, Constantinople is rising. This is really, but this is a development in the 6th century that you really can say, okay, now we can see Constantinople is more powerful than Alexandria. So this is a very, it takes generations literally to see these change. Chalcedon certainly played a great role in this, in the deposition of, a patriarch of Alexandria. I mean, Dioscorus being deposed. About the bribe, this is 432. And I mean, it is a fascinating. I mean, there are several articles. I have this in my first chapter, and I have also an extra article written on this because it's so. Of course, these are texts that you're surprised to find them, right? I mean, this is, and it's collection of text by the opponents. So it's a Latin collectio Carcinensis, and this is actually at the same time as the Acts of Chalcedon were translated into Latin, so 6th century. But it goes back by a Greek collection of the 5th century, and there we find, the letter the Archdeacon of Cyril wrote, and he really describes, what the people should do, and give them the gold when they have, accomplished what we had written to them. And then you get the whole list, who gets what, who get pieces of furniture, clothes, and who gets, these pounds of gold. And I just did the work. I mean, calculated this together, saw that this is really, by all standard. I mean, there's always the problem if we speak about ancient economic, what does it mean, 2,500 pounds of gold? We don't know what 2,000 pounds of gold were worth at this time. And we will never completely know this, but you can, of course, calculate how much would this be in today dollars, for example. I just calculated it for today, for more than 50 million. It's probably even more worse in antiquity. If we speak about also, cash, I mean, and gold would be cash, it's very difficult to get. I mean, often, you have land, but land produces, agricultural products. And, this is, of course, something valuable, and they have grain or they have other things, and you can feed people with this, but cash, getting this together is really something. So it is huge amount of money, and to have used this, we have nothing comparable from all of antiquity. That this amount of money has been paid. So, and we can date this. I mean, it's 432. It's a year after the council, and it's really when, it's clear Nestorius is gone. Usually it has been regarded, it's, he wanted to get rid of Nestorius, but at this point, Nestorius has already been replaced by a successor in Constantinople, Maximus, and Cyril had influence. So he was clearly an ally also of Cyril. The question was really the 12 chapters, and you can see how controversial these were, because there were Eastern bishops who still preferred to go to exile than to make any kind of agreement with Cyril. They said, like, he's a heretic, we can't do this. And this is, as I said, mainly about this question, the so-called theopashism. Can God suffer? Right? This is something which, 5th, 6th century has so many people. I mean, they really look into this and say, how it's God. How can God suffer? Right? And this is, of course, you deal there with the human and the divine nature. Who dies on the cross? I mean, yes, you have somebody, you can read the Bible. Somebody died on the cross, right? I mean, it's so, but this is where the Easterns were scandalized that, you say someone suffering, and this goes until the 6th century. You get then, I didn't go into this, but the controversy, continues then. It's then among the non-Chalcedonians, where you have Severus of Antioch as kind of the, the big theologian, Severus of Antioch, and you have Julian of Halicarnassos, and the controversy of the Aphtatodocetism. Of the question of the incorruptibility of the body. Is the body of Christ incorruptible or not? Right? This is then also, I mean, the divinity, do I have a divine body I can't corrupt, or is it a human body, which of course, will also, decay with age and, can then also die. And this is, where, this is where you can see, this is, discussion which go then through generations. They change a little bit, but this continues.
It's still around somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm gonna give a chance, like if anyone want to jump in. But another question, if anyone is ready, well, please jump. I'm ready to pose. Okay. The other question that I was curious about is the connection between Dioscorus and Flavianus. And we have the council of the second Ephesus, and then within very limited time, the bishop of Constantinople had died. And many claim that it was due to the persecution that Dioscorus kind of enforced at the second Council of Ephesus. I didn't find like any evidence on that, in the sense that yes, he was persecuted, like Patriarch Flavianus. And I think there are a lot of evidences on that, like a lot of supporting arguments, mostly like from of course, like Chalcedonian scholars. But was Flavianus in the council himself? According to my sources, like I don't think like he never attended like the actual meeting. So how are we to understand that?
Second Ephesus, he was present. He was
in person.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think actually the other one, what's his name? Eusebius of Dorylaeum was not present. He was the one who had charged Eutychus, right? The Archimandrite.
Yeah.
And Flavian was kind of the judge in this small synod in Constantinople in 448. So, and this, is one of the things that leads up to the Second Council of Ephesus, and then Eutychus is regarded orthodox. So what about, the accusers? And I think Eusebius is being excluded, and Flavian actually asked if he should not also be, present. But Flavian is present. My take on this is that I think Dioscorus is not in any way violent and in any way involved in this. I'm suspicious for two reasons. I mean, one is if you read, suspicious on the very basic that at Chalcedon you have more than 100 bishops who have been at the Second Council of Ephesus already. And they need to exculpate themselves, right? I mean, and Dioscorus is the perfect scapegoat because you can't blame the emperor. I mean, the emperor is dead, but still you can't blame the emperor because the next emperor is also he's married to Theodosius' wife. So, so this is not really possible. So which scapegoat do you have here? The violence, I think, and if you read these stories of the violence, I'm pretty sure there will be some scholars also say maybe I go too far, that I downplay this, but I don't think if you read the sources, he's then, kind of heading soldiers. I don't know any parallel. Give me an example where there is a patriarch or bishops who is heading soldiers and arresting other bishops. It's usually then imperial officials who do this. And that Flavian died, I don't think we can question this. This is probably a bad treatment in jail. But again, I don't think Dioscorus personally is responsible for this. I don't know who, maybe he sent someone to kill Flavian, but this would be then complete speculation. It's most likely the soldiers, who did this, and maybe no one stopping them.
What was his reputation like? How was because we do like Constantinople? It was definitely like a Cyrilian in there. There was definitely like a Cyrilian followers. And supporters, but was the idea that like Flavianus was kind of like departing from that path that may trigger the people's emotion, like I guess trigger their reaction in how they will address his case, or because the case of like Eutychus is now I think agreed by all scholars that at the Second Ephesus, even I think like this Father John Remenides who supported that, like Dioscorus, when he restored Eutychus, was not like in what is Eutychus accused of, but in the Orthodox tradition, like in the Orthodox belief, that the way how he expressed his faith was perfectly Orthodox in that particular moment. But then later, you have Oriental Orthodox all like excommunicating Eutychus for his theology, and there was all that. So would that be like kind of a concern, like, or what would, I guess, like what was like the motive to attack him or to accuse him? Is that simply because he excommunicated Eutychus illegally, or that itself like as one of the reasons maybe?
Well, Eutychus, I don't know if you know the work by, there's an article by Patrick Gray and George Bevan on Eutychus, an article. I think it's a very smart article, but it's wrong. I mean, this is what I argue in my book, at least. I don't follow their argument that Eutychus is basically an old man who didn't know really what he was doing. And I don't think so. I mean, I don't see how this could have been then kind of an international affair. Why, if he's just an old man who doesn't, he's supported by the emperor, clearly. He can write to, after he is being condemned in November 448, he writes to Dioscorus, he writes to Leo in Rome, he writes to Peter, I think, the Bishop of Ravenna, and asks for support. He is named by the Diophysites, who are very much against him in the East, together with Theodosius, the emperor. So they also chant against him. So he must have been a very well-known figure. The other part of your question, of course, is very difficult to answer. We don't know really in Constantinople how the sentiments were. There have been arguments being made. He must have been a minority. I mean, there must have been many other monasteries and abbots who did not agree with Eutychus. I think then Cana writes about this, and Flavian, as bishop, probably know the sentiments also within his own bishopric, within own sees. This is, I think, totally possible. That he was on one hand influential, particularly with the court, but not, had not the majority, the popular vote, so to speak. On the other hand, we also don't know how popular Flavian really was in Constantinople. We have a little bit, Nestorius in his Bazaar of Heraclitus writes about this also, and I mean, the controversy of Flavian clashed with Emperor Theodosius in church. It's very difficult to make sense of this. I mean, very difficult to interpret the source and understand what was really going on. It's not easy.
Thank you so much. I think there's this is a very complicated topic because there's just like every possible answers, but at the same time very limited sources, and harder to review them from here, like from our time. There's a question and on the chat if you
I see.
Can see it.
Yeah, I a little bit skipped this now in the presentation. I apologize about this. Maybe I did talk too much about the introduction and should have. I looked into this and I see it. I don't think anything is true about this. It's rather the case. I do think bishops needed to beware in late antiquity that there might be unhappy clerics going around and trying to get their cases heard at councils, depending on, religious politics have been a little bit fickle in late antiquity. And, you go from council to council and try to someone hear them, then they could bring forth these charges. And, these minions of Cyril and Athanasius, they have been expelled from Alexandria for a long time. And they even say in their accusation that, when they came to Constantinople, a comes, an imperial official put them to jail and took another money out of them. This was, of course, in the early times of Dioscorus' tenure in 444, 445, probably something like this. So that shows to me that, what Dioscorus did was probably right. I may even think that maybe, some of the money that had been lost through Cyril, he tried, and not through Cyril, now not talking about the bribery case, but there were nepotism cases that, the family of Cyril probably, appropriated some of the church funds and buildings, these kind of things. Churches, like Alexandria, how do they get rich? That people inherit things to them, right? Land or buildings, this kind of things. Some of them may not make a church rich because you need to, also maintain the buildings. But you could also give this to some people, and, maybe some of them apparently have been given to Cyril's family. And Dioscorus tried to make things right. Got this property back to the church, expel the family of Cyril, and, kick them out of Alexandria. Apparently, the court in Constantinople saw this as the right thing to do, and also went after the family. And the accusations of adultery, this is, you can go around, you will see, you have this against bishops. If you need to accuse them, he was also, what was it, blasphemy against God. Yeah, sure. This is kind of, if you really don't like your bishop, this is kind of what you do. There's a woman, he's gambling, and, he blasphemed God. But
that's also like
you can see from the sources. He's a very serious theologian. This is, as I said, even at Chalcedon, they don't agree with him, they depose him, but there's no question that he is, not blaspheming God. So,
I think we are definitely past our our time. I apologize for the delay, but we are truly grateful for your time and your incredible book. Again, everyone, if you want to check the book, I can send you we have a group, so I can send you in the group as well. But this is a truly very interesting and quite a remarkable work. But thank you again, Professor. And
I thank you.
One thing that I forgot to mention in the beginning is I usually recorded the video, so I want to make sure I let you know. I should have told you, but I remember in the middle, and I don't want to pause you. But the video is recorded. Usually we share it with the group or in our platform, but that's with your permission.
Okay.
Again, thank you, and we are grateful.
Thank you for having me. Thanks so much. And very good work. I admire you to do this. And I'm sorry, the book might be a little heavy read if you read it, but I appreciate, of course, the interest, and I think it's a great topic. I have to say, I enjoyed it very much working with Dioscorus. So.
Thank you so much. It's definitely very intensely academic. And it does need both the historical context, reading all the sources that you have, but it definitely is a turning point. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Professor.
Thank you for your kind words. All the best.
Thank you. You too. Stay safe. Have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.